Hey everyone, welcome back to the Choose Inclusion podcast. We are doing a special live series called Black Voices Matter, and we appreciate you joining us today. I'm here with Yubi. Mike is taking a much needed break today. So Yubi, thank you for joining.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thanks for coming back and listening.
So we have an amazing guest today. Aaron Clark is joining us. He is a freelance developer and the founder of Equity Solutions. I met Aaron during the preparations for what was supposed to be Boulder Startup Week this year. Aaron is an incredible leader, really thoughtful when it comes to thinking about how to build inclusive conferences and really just changing the tech industry to make sure that it's more inclusive, that diversity is top of mind, not just a side conversation that companies should be talking about. And so, Aaron, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Yubi. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Aaron, let's just, I think the first thing that we want to ask you is just, how are you feeling, man? How are you doing?
Well, thank you for asking. I'm actually feeling okay. A little tired. It's definitely been a long and arduous week for us that are working in the equity space, and also holding the weight of this crisis and this heavy weight that we're dealing with amongst the Black people and the Black community. But I also feel very fortunate. I do have a good network of folks around me that have supported, that have checked in, that have messaged. And I also feel very resourced to step in and help where I can. One of the things that I've noticed is that it's interesting it's necessary for everyone to do their part in this fight. And I feel like my part is in helping other people educate themselves on these issues. So I feel good, but I also feel heavy at the same time.
Yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability, and I think it's important for people to hear that, right? Like it's, everybody gets asked, like, how are you doing? And the default's always like, oh, pretty good. But right now, we can't default that answer. So, because I think that, it's a hard time. What are you seeing, in the world that you come from? You've done a lot of work in the VC space, and what are you seeing and hearing from that community right now?
Well, I'm hearing from a lot of folks in the VC/CEO leader space that happen to be white. They seem to want to reach out right now, and a lot of them, at least the ones that I've been dealing with, they seem to understand that this is the time to listen, and this is the time to do some deep learning of themselves, to find out where their biases are at, what they've done to create the system of oppression that we have, and also the things they've done to try and dismantle it, and then to look at what they can do to continue that work. I've been reassured and encouraged by the amount of times that I've actually brought direct feedback back to people that maybe even 2 or 3 months ago, I probably wouldn't have said it as direct. And after trying it a few times, and it kept working, I'm continuing to do it. So I'm hearing that they're ready to listen, and they're taking feedback. And I just don't think that's an opportunity that I can pass by.
Well, I mean, I think that's interesting because, when I kind of entered the diversity, equity, inclusion space, it seemed like the conversations that we're capable of having now were just not considered palatable. We always had to enter it from kind of subconscious bias and things like that. And now we can actively talk about, white supremacy and how to not just say I'm not a racist, but to actually be anti-racist and things like that. I mean, what have you been seeing in terms of the tone of the conversations and maybe how they've changed just in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I remember that as well. Like some of the tone around equity and things like, criminal justice reform, you had to make this business ROI case for why you should hire under-resourced, underrepresented folks, or why you should make sure that diversity on your teams and inclusion on your teams mattered. And if you couldn't make that strong business case, it was an uphill battle. And I think people were just, by and large, just not paying attention to the struggle of other people. But because, the realistic scenario we have is that our world has been thrust into a health crisis, a pandemic that has forced us to sit at home and pay attention more to what's going on. We have more time. And then we've noticed the things like it's disproportionately affecting Black and brown people, Native Americans are affected. And then we turn and enter into a series of brutal murders of Black people, and we're seeing that all play out right in front of our eyes. And I think what that did is it changed the perspective of people, and they realized that what these equity consultant-ish type people, what they've been saying for so long is so important, and I should slow down and listen. And it kind of tapped into the heart, I think, of a lot of people that, they had good intentions, they have good hearts, it was there. It just unfortunately took two crises in order to make it a little easier for you and I to have these conversations we're having with people.
Yeah, I think with all the media coverage, I'm glad to hear that more people are listening, especially, leaders at companies. I mean, do you think that once the media coverage dies down, is this going to be sustainable? Do you think that there's going to be actual change happening in the long run?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I get a little afraid that if we don't, jump on this right now, it's going to go away. And I fear that the next thing is going to be, whatever political thing is going to happen in November is going to take away some of the attention over these issues. But I have to hope that that's not the case. I have to go into this work thinking and believing that we're setting something up that will change for the future. And then the other piece is that in some of the networks that I'm in, amongst mainly Black and brown folks right now, there's a lot of pressure around this exact topic, thinking through and saying, hey, we do see what's going on. And there's even some skepticism about what's going on. But some folks are like, hey, we're going to check in 2 weeks. We're going to check in 4 weeks. We're going to see if you held up to it. So my hope is that pressure stays on people to continue this fight and this change for the long run.
What do you suggest to people? Because I know there's a lot of people, including ourselves, who we're kind of sitting there and trying to figure out what is it that we can do, right? And what would you say to individuals who agree, like who want to keep the pressure up, who want to help in any way, shape, or form that they can? Like, what do you tell them? What can they do?
Well, the analogy to think about is, unfortunately, when someone passes in your life, or say a friend of someone, a loved one of someone passes, often you check in with the person that, that remains the family a couple times. And then unfortunately, it kind of goes by the wayside. And so I think what I would tell people is to commit to some sort of cadence of communication, listening, and checking in on people. If it's in the business world, communicate or commit, I should say, to weekly calls with your equity consultant, or weekly calls with whoever's helping you form the strategy. It just honestly has to be thought of like therapy, like you would work with your lawyer or your CPA. Yes, you're going to hire these folks to do your business document or your taxes, but you're also going to check in with them every other week on your books, or every month on your taxes, or whatever it is. And so I think I would tell people to start looking at this work, and by this work I mean listening to Black folks and work with your consultants. Look at this as long-term strategic business operations that you're doing.
That's great advice. I think one of the things that is really weighing on me personally is just how deeply ingrained in the systems that we've set up are the big part of the problem of why we've hit the boiling point that we've hit today. You've been working at the intersection of criminal justice reform and kind of tech for many years now. Can you tell me what you learned in the process of working at that intersection and where you see that applying today?
Well, that's a good question. I see systems that were put in place and designed the way that they are over and over. One of the phrases that's kind of thrown around in the justice world is, a quote unquote broken criminal justice system, and we need to, fix it, et cetera. But the reality is the criminal justice system in America is actually working the way that we designed it. It was designed very early on to oppress and keep down people that the elite, the power, the money, the landowners did not want to exceed. And so it's actually working by design. Then if you look at, a capitalist society that we live in, it is designed by its very nature to benefit those that have access to that capital. And we know, there are certain people groups in our world that have more access than others. Unfortunately, Black folks, don't have access as much to some other folks. So I see these scenarios we're in today, like living in a state that is not incredibly diverse, and you have to look and say, that's how it was supposed to be. And if we actually want change, yes, we're going to do all these things. We're going to give to organizations that are doing great work. We're going to hire people to increase diversity of not only workers, but executives and investors, et cetera. We'll hire and invest in more Black founders, but we have to really understand that what really is going to change this is supporting the Black community and making sure that we're actually dismantling the systemic racism that's pervasive in our country. Without doing that, we're not really going to make change. And I don't believe that the Black folks that we're hearing from today are going to let up on that.
Yeah, I hope you're right. Because I completely agree. Like this can't be like every reaction we've had to like mass school shootings, for example, or previous deaths of people of color. We have, like, it has to change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of where I'm at. Like, this is an either or scenario. There's no gray area.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, how do you get people to sort of pull their head out of the ground and stop hiding from this?
Yeah, the other day I was watching a video, Dr. Nita Mosby Tyler, who is one of the authors in the DEI Today app and platform that we're building, and she made a comment on that newscast about, a lot of her work is simply just creating space for people to be okay to talk about race and to be okay to talk about these uncomfortable subjects. And I feel like we fast forwarded to a point now where it's like we're a little bit past just being uncomfortable talking about it. And now we can actually do the work. And like I said, I just have a feeling that like we have to make sure we don't go back. We have to make sure that no matter what comes next week, we don't let up on this work. And, the downside of our, 2020 technical world is we have media and social media at our fingertips, and it's overwhelming and it's stressful, and you've got access to tons of information, at the tip of your fingerprints or tip of your fingers. But on the flip side, these images that we've seen over the last week and a half of the murder of George Floyd, and then of the protests and the police brutality against the protesters, those images are not going to leave us. It reminds me, when I see and think about these, of the images of Emmett Till and the images of the other folks that were lynched, and all the things that you can see at the Equal Justice Institute in Montgomery, Alabama, of the lynchings of Black Americans pre-civil rights days. And so these images are our generation's call to action. And there's something, like you're saying, there's something we cannot allow ourselves to go back on from this point.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the advantage of social media is that it puts it right there, almost real time in front of so many more people than a picture in a newspaper, for example,
Yeah.
decades ago. So I think that's a big component to the change taking effect, taking hold. What so Sort of the flip side of that is there's so much information coming at us about a lot of different things, COVID, then this, like, what are people, do you think people are struggling with, like, with priorities? Like, prioritize, like, well, how do you prioritize, what's what is really the most important thing that we should be focused on right now
I
and
wholeheartedly
try to fix?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that people are struggling with priorities. Um, I would say this is now the seventh straight day that I've been kind of doing the same thing of working with people to, go through and write these statements and look at strategy while doing all the other work that's on my plate. And, I was talking to a colleague and he was saying, we were talking about a news article about news not related to the Black community. And he's like, yeah, I haven't even seen that. And we were joking that we haven't had the opportunity to, read the latest story about what's happening in sports, which there's not a lot of news, but there's a few things I've heard. But I haven't had a chance to do that. And I do think people are overwhelmed with information, and that is a downside. So I think what people have to do is people have to make a choice about where they want to focus their energy. The people that are fighting this fight, that are helping to push it, you probably have to decide: are you going to protest? Are you going to be the person that goes out and fights on the streets and advocates for change, and joins in the numbers, the masses of people? But then there's some people that need to work online. They need to work on social media. They need to push efforts to make sure that the Black communities are supported. They need to push public policy, push police reform. And so I think, it's a classic kind of hone in on what you want to work and fix and stay focused, while remembering the problem again is that we need to dismantle structural racism in this country, and the support has to stay on the Black community for the time being. And it'll shift. It'll shift to something else, I'm sure, that we need to focus on. But this is where it's at, and as long as those two things are paramount in front of your vision, that's how I think we see lasting and sustaining change.
I think, like, the tech sector in particular has been kind of explicitly and implicitly, part of the problem of upholding white supremacy in this country and, across the world, really. I mean, what should the tech sector be doing to dismantle this, to uphold Black voices during all of this?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things that the tech sector is doing, and for better or for worse, we tend to try and fix human problems with technology, and I don't believe that's the answer. Granted, there will be new apps that come out, there will be new products that come out, and obviously that's just going to happen. But I think that the tech sector has to invest in making sure this problem doesn't ever get this bad again. If you look at the last, say, 10 years, 5 or 10 years of diversity reports, and most of the companies that publicly release their diversity numbers, the numbers didn't change that much. There's a few outliers of companies that did well in certain areas of diversity and inclusion. But we've had companies recently that have turned to canceling out their diversity programs. And so I think tech companies have to relook at their customers and realize that their customers are actually a diverse group of people, and their employees, their strategies, their culture has to match that. I've been a fan of the hiring process needing to be over a reform for a long time, because to get into tech as a programmer, for instance, there are some ways to go through it, like going through a coding boot camp, which is fantastic. But what folks don't often know and are not often told, that once you finish that program, that coding bootcamp program, it's very, very hard to get a role in a company, mainly because the companies aren't taking time to mentor, newer folks and people that are coming in from other backgrounds. And so I think tech has to put more time there. These coding boot camps across the nation are doing a fantastic job of giving people the basics and a start. And I think tech has to say, cool, we appreciate that. We'll take it from here. We've got tons of people. We'll slow down our process and actually mentor people. If every company out there would agree to ramp up their mentoring process, we've got Black and brown coders all across this country that just want an opportunity. I had one Black coder friend of mine that I turned him on to a company that was hiring a startup related to COVID. And I actually know this guy. I know his code. I've worked with him, and he's at junior level, but he just needs an opportunity. And in 45 minutes over the phone, they just turned him down because he wasn't quick enough. He wasn't good enough. And I think that type of thing has to change so that companies will take the time to bring someone on and train them and mentor them.
Right. Like these are long, like right now you see all these companies kind of throwing up the hashtag Black Lives Matter on their websites and on their social feeds. But I think you're hitting on a really big point, which is how are they systemically building companies that go beyond a hashtag in this moment in history?
Yeah, because the thing is, Black folks are fighting back right now and pushing back at the onus of saying that we are less than. We are not less than. We're not underqualified. We're not non-intelligent people. We are intelligent people. The problem is we haven't been giving access and opportunity that a lot of the folks have. A lot of the coders that I know that are coming from an elite background into a good school, these folks had access to code when they were 8 years old. They had computers in their home because maybe their dad or their uncle or their mom, was into computers. And so they've been doing this their entire time. Whereas in the Black and brown community, especially the Black community, we're behind in terms of, when we start getting involved in tech. And so to me, equity says this person did not get what they could have benefited from. So in turn, I'm going to give them more than I give other people so that they can succeed. Just today, I think I want to say that the company is called Sacred Design Lab, and I want to say they're somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, but maybe not. This company pays their POCs, or people of color, an extra 26% when they're paying for like contract work and design work. And the reason they do that is because they realize that these people that they're hiring have access to less capital and less resources than other folks, and they're doing their best to make up that difference. That's what more tech companies have to do for us to truly succeed.
Well, yeah, and it's a choice, right? They have to make that choice. Just like going back to what you said earlier, it's, well, because of COVID, or that companies are reducing budgets, cutting diversity and inclusion programs, but it's like you can't cut one thing off because of another. Like all of these things are interconnected, and more companies and more leaders, I believe, need to see that in order to realize that interconnectedness is what's going to save them, and being intentional about exactly the example you just gave, paying our people of color contractors more because of these systemic issues that have been around forever, and increasing our focus on diversity and inclusion throughout the entire organization, because that's what's going to save our company. There's too many, well, if then, or well, not this but this. It's kind of, you have to look at it as a whole. And I guess that kind of goes back to my question about priorities. It's like, yeah, all of these things that may not seem to be connected that are happening right now, I think actually are.
Yeah, and they are connected. And I saw one statement recently around hiring more Black folks, and I liked the statement because it mentioned the population and the realistic success that could be had with more hires. And so when you see that, you're like, okay, that is a realistic and that's a good choice that a company or a VC is making in order to diversify its portfolio, diversify its founders or its board that's tied to something like the metrics of the city. But it's something that a company or VC has to make that decision and say, this is what I want to do. And I'm going to state it out loud and I'm going to do it, because it's no different than, say if you're launching some business, the same thing happens for the launch. Startups are known for the tenacity that they have, and the founders, executive, the team will do what it takes to make sure that business succeeds. And I think if that same tenacity were used around supporting the Black community, they would achieve their goals.
So, Aaron, just to kind of wrap it up, the whole point of the Black Voices Matter series that we're doing here is that everyone just needs to sit back and listen a little bit more, especially to Black voices right now. And so, if you could say whatever it is that you want to say to the world, what is it that you want people to hear right now coming from you?
That's a good question. So many things come to mind. I would say the first thing that I would say is I saw a post, and this post said, don't question another person's pain, or you don't understand their pain. And so the first thing I would say is understand that the trauma and the pain that the Black community has carried for every single one of us for our entire lives is really insurmountable unless you've actually walked in our skin, which is not possible to do it and change. There's just no way to understand it. There's no analogy. It's very similar to being a father. And even though I have had kids or my partner, I don't understand what it's like to bear a child. I was there. I participated. I was empathetic. I went to classes. I read. I put in my work more than one time, but I still have no idea what it's like to bear a child. And so I think the first thing is for folks to understand that, you just can't understand what it's like. And so you just have to have empathy over all things. And then the second thing is, this is somewhat of a shameless plug because it's tied to a product that I'm building, but I don't think that this work actually, or I should say, I don't think this movement actually works without hearts and minds changes. And so in order for, if you come from a place of privilege, in order for you to get to that place of empathy and trying to understand, as much as you can to walk in someone else's shoes, it takes work. I remember recently when, this is a story that I've told, a lot lately, but as a man growing up from the South with not the best grammar, using gender pronouns properly for folks was really difficult for me. I use guys a lot. I call people he and she, no matter what I thought. It just kind of came out of my mouth. And so I had to slow down and go to someone and said, hey, can you please help me in this area? What do I need to do? Can you talk me through this? Can you give me some pointers? And I had to do that education. And I'm still not, sometimes I still will make a mistake. And thankfully the folks around me are pretty graceful with it. And so the second thing I would say is education and personal development. You've just got to do your work and put the time into it. And the third thing I'll say, equity work is a graceful space, or it needs to be a graceful space. People are going to make mistakes, and it's okay. If someone makes a mistake, I think we should call them out and say, hey, this is not okay. But we should give folks a chance to kind of learn, because at the end of the day, I don't want people to hurt. I don't want people that are racist against me to hurt. I really want them to learn. Unfortunately, it's hard, but we just need to keep creating graceful spaces for people to kind of learn what this work is all about.
Perfect way to end this conversation. Thank you, Aaron, for everything. As always, we are here to listen and learn and support in any way we can. We look forward to doing great things and seeing great things from you with the new product coming out and just the work that you're doing for Colorado. So thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you, UB, and thank you, Nina, for having me on. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for your friendship and support. It does mean a lot.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. Again, check our website, chooseinclusion.com, for upcoming episodes of Black Voices Matter. And we will check you next time. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.